So something I saw on, hey Mike, hi Mike's hubby. Something I saw in a manuscript I was working on this morning, and I'm just going to talk so we don't have dead air, so please go ahead and type in a question at any point. But something I see quite a bit and was thinking about this morning also is that in multiple POV stories, people often assign a chapter to the wrong character's POV. So whenever you are working with multiple POVs, you've got to ask yourself who's got the most at stake in this chapter. What is the action here? And who's going to be the most deeply impacted emotionally, physically, who's going to be changed, who's most affected by this action. That's the character whose POV should get that chapter. So something to keep in mind, because it's quite common for writers to give the POV to someone who's in more of a witness position instead of an active position in that chapter. So hi Lindsay, welcome. So, all right, time for the hold music. Does anyone have a question for me? Anything you've been thinking about? Like I said, I don't really prepare because it's just a Q&A, not a talk. Oh, thank you, Mike. Thinking about Gatsby again. Why do I think Nick works as a witness viewpoint? Well, because, as we were saying last week, he has the most at stake because he's the one who changes. Gatsby dies and Daisy doesn't change, whereas Nick ends up in a sanitarium. He is so deeply and profoundly moved by the action of that story, by what happens to Gatsby and Daisy, that his life will never be the same again. He also works as a witness viewpoint because Fitzgerald was making social commentary, and Gatsby and Daisy as members of that class, Daisy born into the class and Gatsby a social climber, couldn't make the same observations and social criticisms that Nick makes. So seeing the story through Gatsby and Daisy's eyes, we might have been more immediately involved in the action than we do with Nick, but we would have lost that layer of social observation, criticism, and commentary that Nick brings to it. Oh, Lindsay, I'm sorry you're having issues getting it to play. I don't know if rebooting would help. Hi, Reneel. Welcome. So, Mike, any other thoughts about Gatsby, or did that answer your question? And everyone just jump in at any moment. Thanks, Mike, with questions. So, because I'm just here for a Q&A, not to lecture. So, while I'm waiting for a question to come in, I'll just say that I hope people start using the Storyworks group to pose questions about Storycraft and your thoughts and ideas, and I'll put the Word Essential videos and also the Storyworks roundtable videos on this page. So it's a great forum to comment on those, add your thoughts to the discussion, get engaged with other writers. So we're just in our infancy here, but I hope as we get more users, people will become active participants and really share your own ideas and thoughts about Storycraft. All right, Lindsay says, how do I make a villain more realistic and not just a pure bad guy? Common issue. So The way to make a villain realistic is to do your work developing him. Or her, but I'm going to use him. There's a thing called Save the Cat. You may have heard of it. And that basically is a device used often to show that the villain isn't 100% black hat, but he's also got some sort of soft underbelly. He does something nice, like saving a cat, so that the reader feels a little bit of sympathy toward him. And, you know, that's very simplistic, kind of trite sounding even, but what you want to do is make sure that your villain isn't just two-dimensional. So we need to see the villain, learn about the villain in aspects other than simply as that black hat. Now, it also depends somewhat on the kind of villain that you create. In Dark Corners in Skog Hall, my villain is a psychopath or a sociopath. I'm not sure which one right now. But when we see the villain, I gave him a POV, so he's got a very minor POV. And when we see him, I'm exploring what kind of a person would do these things, what is going through his head. So I didn't really try to show him being good or having depth, but I tried to show him as a real person, as someone you might know but not realize has this capacity for evil. So I showed how he has relationships with his peers and his employer, how he is very manipulative, how he can be charming, how he can be controlling, demanding. He's sort of like the kid in high school who's got power over other people, and he's not an out-and-out bully. He doesn't use force to have that power, and he's not the football captain. He doesn't use charm either, but there's some combination of traits in his personality that gives him that ability to manipulate others. And I also wanted to go into his psyche a bit and show his devious nature. So there it wasn't about saving the cat, it was about getting real and getting inside that kind of person. So when you're a villain, and you don't need a point of view to do this, that was just my choice for this book, but when your villain is only shown doing dirty deeds to the good guy, then we lack that depth. So, as I said, Save the Cat is a little bit trite, and it is. Whether you're showing the villain, you know, being a good family man, but a horrible misogynistic boss or whatever, or going deeper into what makes him evil, it's about depth. It's about don't be shallow with your take on your villain. You've got to show the reader more than the black hat tying up the girl on the train tracks. So is that enough of an answer? Does anyone want more? Have a follow-up? Or a new question? And feel free to type while I talk, because these questions don't pop up that quickly for me. Or even if you just want to offer an example of a good villain, you know. Let's see. Oh no, Lindsay's internet keeps freezing. Okay, sorry about that, Lindsay. So I'll talk a little bit while I wait for a question to come up about the two sides of the character coin, and they are likable and fascinating. So someone like Hannibal Lecter is extremely fascinating and charming, but not necessarily likable. So Mike says, I've got some villain trouble. My protagonist makes him by betraying him. She literally turns him into a monster, a Franken monster who just wants revenge. I think the motivation works, but I just want to make sure the villain comes off round and interesting. It's not my usual kind of villain. Well, how does she turn him into a monster? Is it a psychological monster or a physical monster, like a comic book villain like Two-Face? So sympathy helps to make a villain round and interesting. So if we're witnessing this villain's transformation from normal, decent person to vengeful demon, then establishing who he is first, and then witnessing that transformation will create sympathy for the villain in the reader, because we'll understand where he came from and what he had to go through to become that monster. So sympathy is key there. As in Frankenstein, we have sympathy for the creature because we understand that he was dead. He was gone off to heaven or hell or wherever he went, and all those different body parts were sewn together. And, we'll say the soul came with the brain because that's where his intelligence and his ability to learn came from. So that part of him came from a good person who was, I believe, a professor, right? So even though the creature does horrible things over the course of the book and transitions from being confused and alone and wanting his father for love and comfort to only wreaking havoc upon his father/creator, Victor Frankenstein, we have to have pity for him because he didn't ask to be put in that position. He was made, not born to that. And he didn't ask for it. We get a lot of the naive pre-monster guy, which is maybe why I feel like I lose so much of the character with the reversal. Well, what is the focus of the book? Do you spend too much time pre-monster? Maybe you just need to trim that so that we understand what he was before without quite so much depth, and then put your development process into who he is now. So the monster afterwards is the one where you focus. It depends on your goal with the story as well, because he's the villain, so your protagonist, you said your protagonist is the one who created the monster, right? So is it like Frankenstein where we don't really feel for the protagonist? Yeah, I think you could just continue to show him as sympathetic after the transformation. I would ensure the reader sees him before the transformation because, that's part of your story, but I would keep that brief because the main story is the part where he's the villain, but show his agony over what he has become. So he's not just that cardboard black hat. He's got depth, and there's something there that we can sympathize with. It's about understanding something of his motivation. So, are you expecting the reader to be very conflicted? Your protagonist created him and now he wants revenge. So should we be rooting for the protagonist? I've taught Frankenstein both in a graduate course and in a high school course. And a lot of readers don't like Victor. They don't really like the creature either. But at the end of the book, they blame Victor for everything that happened and find him quite despicable because of the destruction that he brought upon everyone he loves by creating the creature. So even though Victor's motivation and intentions were good, all of that is trumped by the outcome and by the fact that he didn't take responsibility for his creature. So how you want your reader to feel about your protagonist is going to factor heavily into how we view the villain whom she created. Right. Right, yes. I think at best we sympathize with the creature until he does worse than the protagonist's original betrayal. Yeah, it's very Frankensteinian. Very good. So, other questions or comments? Anyone else want to chime in here? Or Mike, do you have another question? Anyone? You're welcome, Mike. So far we've been talking about villains and making them three-dimensional. Yeah, and I'll just talk for a bit until another question comes through. One thing to keep in mind as you focus on developing your villain and making your villain 3 dimensions and sympathetic, or at least, fascinating, is to keep your protagonist's agency in mind and make sure that the hero is making choices, taking actions, and suffering the consequences. So this is especially true of thrillers and detective stories, police procedurals and such, because the hero is often put in the position of chasing the villain, kind of a cat and mouse game. So then it's like the villain is leading the hero through through all these stages of the chase, and the villain really has control over the story. And so you need to make sure as your story progresses that you do more than that, that your protagonist actually has choices, actions, and consequences that she drives, that aren't just a matter of following the villain. So it might be setting traps, it might have stuff to do with the subplots and the relationship she has with other characters that can then support and buoy up the main plot as we're going through a lot of that midsection of the book, which is the chase parts. So, what genres is everyone writing? What genres are people writing? We should have autocorrect as we speak, except not, because it gets everything wrong. See if there's something else I can chat about while we wait for, Stephanie. Hi, Stephanie. What is a good rule of thumb for a chapter? Basically, should it be one scene, multiple, or does it just depend on pacing? That's an awesome question, Stephanie, and I was just commenting on that this morning in a manuscript I'm working on. So, a lot of people think that short chapters make for a faster pace. And that's partially true. It feels physically fast because we hit those chapter breaks sooner, but that can actually come back to bite you in the ass if that's how you're structuring your chapters based on a rule of thumb instead of on what's actually best for your story. So a lot of short chapters don't actually contain enough material to support a chapter. So if you're writing like single scene chapters, but you need a scene that's basically set up or resolutioned, some piece of action, then that's all that chapter contains. And that's where you get in trouble with the rule of thumb. You need to have an opening to your chapter. Those tend to be quiet. They're usually resolving the hook of the previous chapter and setting up the action, the rising action in the current chapter. And then you need the rising action, and then you need your climactic action or big reveal. So your climactic action in a chapter could be emotional. It doesn't have to be like a shootout or something. So the structure of your chapter is just a microcosm of the structure of your entire book. And if you're doing short chapters, that doesn't always give you enough space to create rising action and climactic moments within your chapter. So I like to say chapters should be 1 to 3 scenes. 3 is a great average. Some long chapters could be 4 or 5 scenes, especially if they're shorter scenes. Sometimes you just need a short, punchy chapter. Those are your 1 scene chapters. But to create resolution, setup, rising tension, stakes, and climactic action, 3 scenes is typical and a good, solid rule of thumb, because you wanted a rule of thumb. Now, remember, scene breaks indicate shifts. That line of white space is a visual indication to the reader that we're changing. So you can change your setting, you can change your time, so location or time jump or characters. The characters could change. So if none of that stuff changes, if it's all continuous action through the chapter, you might have 1 long scene that contains your resolution and or setup, your rising stakes and tension, and your climactic moment at the end of that chapter. So if you're writing, most novels, like 10-page chapters is kind of a good average. 8 to 10 pages is a nice average. For a lot of novels, literary and genre, if you're getting into the thrillers and such, where shorter chapters are more the norm, 5 to 6 pages, 4 to 6 pages can be a good average. But again, you've got to do what's right to tell the story. So if you're creating a string of single scene short chapters, but they're lacking those climactic moments, they're just like giving information to the reader, then what you end up with is 20 pages of single scene chapters where not much happens. So that's when it comes back to bite you in the ass. So I hope someone's typing. Let me know if that answered the question, if there are follow-up questions about this or new questions. So, and while people type, I'll just remind you that you should think of your book structure on like small, medium, and large. So you all know about Freytag's pyramid and the character arc. Stephanie says that, plot arc. I was reading and talking. Stephanie says that it explains a lot. Haha, thank you. You're welcome. I'm glad that explained a lot. So you've all heard of Freytag's pyramid, the character arc. Chapter 1, the book opens, we have rising action to the climax, then the denouement, the resolution. So that's your book's graph. And within that, each chapter should have the same basic structure. And within each chapter, each scene can be viewed as having the same basic structure. That's your rule of thumb. Of course, there's variation, times when we need to stretch or break the rule of thumb. But think of it that way. Mike says, for the urban fantasy short I've been working on, we don't see confirmed magic until the climax. So I've been playing with if he's a little crazy. Does he really capture Jin pushing into our universe in his paintings, or does he just paint his own inner demons? Given that it's all real, am I taking the reader on an interesting journey or just being confusing? Oh, interesting journey, absolutely. There's nothing wrong with being a little bit ambiguous. The action can't be ambiguous, but what is behind it can be. And I do this in a stone's throw. So I've got a painting that comes to life, and we don't know if the character is just imagining this, if she's having, a mental breakdown, or if this painting is physically coming to life. She's painting a life-size mural, and the figure she paints comes out and interact with her. So I think most readers will believe that it's real the way the action goes throughout the entire book, and especially by the end. I don't really think anyone will believe it's all in her head, but it's fine if they do. And especially at first, as they're getting used to the magic realism and getting involved in this character's interactions with the figures and her emotional stakes and watch how it progresses. They might think she's imagining this. There's another character who sees this, so she might just be psychic. I mean, you could kind of take whatever stance you want on it. And it doesn't affect the story. And I don't care which way people interpret it. So I just care that they enjoyed the journey. And whether they think the magic is real or imagined or psychotic doesn't change the character's journey or the outcome of the story. So I think it's nice to give readers interesting things to think about and, you know, kind of chew on as they read. And I like those questions. Is he crazy or is this real? So that's fun. Okay, any other questions? Anyone? Oh, good. I had to scroll up. Oh, interesting. I like the idea. I can leave a hint of whether the witness has simply been indoctrinated into what it means to be an artist, as with the described ambiguity. Thanks. You're welcome. All right. Any other questions? I'm just looking at the book to see if anything jumps out at me, something related we can talk about until a question comes in. Let's see, last week we talked about motivation. So if you missed that one, you can watch the video on this page. That was a good chat. So don't forget your supporting characters and your subplots. Really spend some time with them. Like says quirks. What's a good way to give characters quirks and what should we avoid? What should you avoid? Well, avoid anything cliche, trite, hackneyed, stupid, you know, been there, done that. So that's easy. In terms of quirks, it really depends on the individual character. It's part of that development process and what the character's role is in the story. So one example I used in here, which you could call a quirk, is if you decide in your character's development process in the backstory that he went to seminary school, one of his quirks now, whether he works, you know, as a minister or not, might be that he likes to quote scripture. It could just be kind of a character quirk. And that could be a source of tension. It might really annoy people in his life if they aren't interested in hearing scripture quoted. And maybe he just can't help it because it's so much in his brain and so much part of his psyche that that's what pops to mind when he's talking to people. So that could be kind of a fun way to play with a character's backstory and personal history and development, as well as creating some awkward situations or some funny situations. He could also be in situations where people just eat it up and think he's, you know, the cat's meow or something because he's so knowledgeable about scriptures. So in terms of quirks, finding quirks, go into your character's individual history. Don't try to find a quirk out there and then stick it on your character, like, you know, pushing his glasses up his nose or something. You can have a character do that kind of stuff as a tag, but it's not the same as a quirk. Quirks should be individual, you know, so go through that development process, look at the history and say, what is this person going to do that others are going to think is a little oddball or quirky? So let me know if that helped or if you have follow-up questions. Hi, Saran. Welcome. let me know if you have any questions, because I'm not lecturing, I'm just answering questions. So let's see if anyone, no. So now I get to wait for a question. Oh, I was starting to talk about supporting characters and subplots. There is, hi. So a lot of times you get that soggy middle problem where you, someone just asked to join the writer's page, so, but I don't want to leave us. So, sorry. Notifications are distracting, aren't they? You get the soggy middle problem, and that's where your main plot action is kind of thin, and that's because your character is doing something like traveling. It's a part of the journey, some of the legwork, some of the homework or research or whatever that just has to happen to fulfill the plot, but it's not that interesting and it doesn't have tension in it. So in those areas, you need to bring your subplots to bear on the story in order to keep the tension and the stakes interesting. So that depends on your supporting characters, keeping them well developed, involved in the story, so that's part of your main character's life outside of the main plot. So keep them engaged and pay attention to them. Don't neglect them. Don't put all your effort into your protagonist and your antagonist as you develop your story. All right, I hope someone's typing because we're ready for a new question. Anyone? Anyone? Oh. So Mike said, oh, interesting. I like the idea. I can leave a hint of whether the witness has simply been... Oh, I think I already read that. Okay. All right. Oh, good. A new question. So how do you ensure that the subplots support the overall theme? Well, who's your main character? If your main character is a wife and mother, but her main plot is being an FBI agent, that's an easy one, right? Then the main plot is going to involve her solving a crime, chasing a bad guy, being confronted with lots of physical danger, weapons, stuff like that, travel, whatever. And her subplots are going to involve her home life, her husband, her children, her emotional stakes that come to bear on the physical stakes. So being an FBI agent, she would obviously be somewhat comfortable with putting her own life in the way of danger, chasing the bad guys, working with guns, all that stuff. But emotionally, as a mother, she might have a real issue with what she does. So that the emotional stakes of being a mother complicate the physical stakes of being an FBI agent. So when you're creating your subplots, you have to look at who is in your character's life, right? So in Skog Hall, Jess moves to a new town, so nobody is in her life. It's a clean slate. So pretty quickly, I've got to get her to meet some people. And she's got Tyler, who's her first love interest, Beckett, who becomes her boyfriend. So we've got a subplot of a romantic rivalry there between Tyler and Beckett. It's not rocket science, right? Look at your own life history in all the ways relationships affect your life and how a relationship at home might complicate what you do at work, or it might support it. They don't have to be complicating. Like our FBI agent and the children, she loves them and there are no problems there, so it's not a complication that way, but it's a complication in the fact that it raises the stakes because if she gets hurt, it's not just herself she's got to worry about. She also has to worry about how that affects her children and her husband. So, Jess, the love interest, she has a dog. She had to find somebody to watch her dog while she's off being a psychic detective. Go, who do I need? Who do I need to fill what role? And how are these people going to support or complicate my protagonist's life? And if your protagonist, so Jess gets to a part of the story where she's got to do a lot of digging into the history of her house to find out about the woman who was murdered there 40 years ago. So that's that potentially soggy middle. So what do? You bring in the romantic rivalry and you work with that. So that's how you keep your subplots working with your theme and your protagonist. Just look at your character's life, and so please type follow-ups or new questions. Let's talk about theme for just a second, because your theme has to do with your character's emotional arc and those intangible topics that you want to talk about in your story, through your story. So if Jess's theme is living life on her own terms and feeling a sense of home and, belonging, then moving somewhere new and not belonging and not having anything, she's got to build that. So all of these people she meets, all of the supporting characters, she's either going to fit in and get along with them or be in conflict with them. And that's going to affect that theme of how does she make a place for herself and fit into this new world. So you see how plot and theme work together to let you create a conversation that goes from you to the text to the reader. All right, so Stephanie says, any suggestions for how to keep the chapters where a character needs to be trained with a new skill from feeling like a weird training montage? Write it the way you need to write it so you get all the information on the page. And then when you revise it, pare it back. So get out your paring knife and just trim, trim, trim. You need to keep the pace flowing so that you aren't creating an info dump. When people write these scenes, there's a tendency to want to take all this stuff you just learned and how cool it is, or maybe you learned it a long time ago, and get it on the page so that the readers are tracking what the character is doing and so that they, see that you know your stuff. But then that bogs down the pacing. So you need to go back and only have what's essential there. You don't need to show the reader every step. You need to show the reader enough steps so that they get it. Now, the other thing besides trimming so you don't create an info dump is have emotional layers to this. So when Jess goes to the shooting range and learns how to fire a gun, I didn't focus on the technical aspects of firing a gun. That was part of it. But I went to the firing range for my research, and I was like, what does it sound like? Okay, what does it feel like when the casing ejects? Where does it go? And I really paid attention to my feelings as someone who hadn't fired a gun before. And then I applied that to Jess, but I added to that a layer I don't have in real life, thank goodness. The fear. Like, I went to a shooting range as research for this book. Jess went to the shooting range because a crazy person is after her and she needs to protect herself. So why is your protagonist getting this skill? What is the emotional intensity that you can put into this scene? If I'm learning to fire a gun because I'm afraid for my life, that adds a layer of urgency and fear that you don't otherwise have. So if your character is just like a trainee for the police force, maybe the, sergeant or trainer is putting pressure on him and he's like nervous and he's screwing up. So you can add emotional intensity without making it life or death situations. So how your character interacts with other characters, the purpose or intention behind this training, trimming so it's not an info dump, and then again, subplots, you know. So who would reasonably be in this situation with your protagonist who could support or complicate it, right? All right. Did that help? Any follow-up questions? Anyone? Anyone? Yes. Good, I'm glad that helped. Mike says, what character types do you not see often enough? Oh, gosh. I don't know if there are any types I don't see often enough. I think people are very creative with their protagonists and their storylines, so I do see a lot of good characters. What I don't see, or a problem I commonly see, is that characters are doing things without the proper level of motivation. So I find myself asking writers, why is she doing this? What, you know, I don't believe this. The thing about motivation is that if it's not there on the page, the reader won't believe in your protagonist. The story lacks verisimilitude. It's that, well, why doesn't she just walk away? You know, what's keeping her in this game when the stakes are going up and she has a lot to lose? But I don't see anything keeping her from leaving the game. So, yeah, character types. I don't know that there's a type I'm missing. I just want to see more motivation, more glue, keeping that character in the game. Because when you don't know why your character is doing what she's doing, then you create a situation where readers just don't believe in you, the story, the characters. So, I don't know, Mike, are there types of characters you don't see often enough, or something behind that question? And anyone else? Other comments or questions? We can stay for about another 10 minutes, so if anyone wants to ask or chime in, please do so. I was mostly just fishing for story ideas, of course you were. Well, whatever you write, motivate your characters. Make it solid motivation. Yeah, strong female protagonists, especially young female protagonists, are trending. I see quite a bit of that. Yeah. Right. Well, while I give people a chance to type, I'll just say again, in case you came on later, that I hope people use this forum for talking craft with each other, not just with me, and that you really pitch in to address these questions. Even if you don't have answers, you surely have thoughts and ideas, and I think this could be a great resource for everybody. So I hope that the group forum, that the discussion really builds. And I'll also post the 60-second writing tips in the Storyworks Roundtable to the page each week. So please comment on those, add your thoughts, create discussion around them, and have fun with it. So, any other questions or comments? All right, I'm not seeing any, so I think I'm gonna close this unless something pops up in the next few seconds. Ooh, here's a new question. Okay. Nick of Times, Rand says, how do you personally go from the vague inkling of an idea to a plan for your story? Good question. Journals. I keep a journal. They're not within reach, but I keep a journal for each book that I know I'm going to write. So when I get ideas, if they stick around and they keep, turning in my head, I start writing about them. And I labeled the journal, I put a sticker on it with the book's working title, and then I don't worry about order. It's impossible to sort of divide, plot from character and I just write everything that comes into my head. So it starts vague and amorphous, and then as I get these ideas and things take shape, it's all there on the page for me. And as I have an idea about who this character is, I'll get an idea for what could happen to this character, and then I get an idea for something that could happen, and then I know that requires the supporting character, so then I start developing that. So it's very fluid and freeform, and it covers sort of all aspects of the story. And when I hit a point where I've got enough of the world, the characters, and the plot in my head that I can start shaping a story, then I move into the pre-writing development. So that's really generative, creative, free-form process. And as I develop, I keep using that journal. So I use that journal until the book is done, because every step helps generate new ideas. And then once I get to the pre-writing, then you get into the the storyboarding and the actual crafting of a story, and then you get to the first draft. But from vague inkling to something ready to draft, it's just all about the journal. And I don't even necessarily go back and read the journal. It's more like a repository of ideas, and it's there if I need it. And sometimes I use it, sometimes I don't. But if I don't write it down, it's like the ideas don't stick. They just sort of disappear, and the next day I'm going, what was that great idea I had? So writing them down sort of makes them, gives them staying power in my mind and in my processing. So I hope that helps. Stephanie says, when will your next Storyworks book be published? Well, the next one is POV, and okay, so November, December, January. Hopefully February, possibly March. So my goal is February, March at the latest. And that will be point of view. So it'll go character, point of view, plot, setting, revision. Good. Saran says that helps. I'm glad. All right. We have a few more minutes if anyone has another question. Otherwise, we'll just wrap it up. And I know it takes time to type, and awesome, looking forward to it. Thank you, Stephanie. So, all right, did you guys see the flash tip? Did you like it? I know, I said I'm gonna wrap it up, and it takes time for comments to come in, but I know, so I'm experimenting with flash tips. Actually, it was fun to do, so I will definitely be doing more of the flash tips, but I'll keep doing the longer 60-second writing tips. There's one long one I think got lost. One long what that got lost? Video? I don't know what that means, Mike. And if you ever have ideas for topics for Storyworks Roundtable or me and the writing tips, go ahead and post them on the discussion here on the Storyworks Writers page. That would be a great way to let me and Matt and Catherine know what you guys are interested in. So that would be really helpful. I feel like someone's typing. So I'm waiting a little longer. All right, so I guess that's it. We will wrap this up. Mike, if you want to email me or put on the discussion forum what got lost, that would be great. And thank you so much, everybody. It's been a lot of fun. Ariel didn't have any questions formulated, but she's been watching and it was super helpful. Thank you, Ariel. Thank you for for letting me know that. That's great. It'll definitely encourage me to do more of these. So you are welcome, Mike. All right, guys, thank you. Have a great week, and I hope to see you on that forum. You're welcome, Stephanie. All right, bye.